Hey, it's Greg on here with MaritimeGardening.com. You know, I hear lots of people talk about their gardens and say, oh, it's a weed garden. And, weeds are a problem. But there's one kind of weed that's just wonderful to have around. And I'm not going to talk about what you think I'm going to talk about and what's going to be legal here in Canada in a little while. I'm talking about herbs. and not the kind of herb you think I'm talking about, the kind you use in cooking. And not the kind of herb that you put in brownies and so on and so forth, but the kind you use in pasta and spaghetti and so on. Or at least the kind of pasta and spaghetti I like to eat, which is, your basil, your oregano, your sage, savory, thyme, all that sort of stuff. So, right behind me is the south-facing side of my house, and this is a driveway. And I did a video on this a couple years ago, and I really haven't followed up on it at all. And I just thought and I didn't really have an audience at that point in time, so I thought I'd speak to this again for those that maybe want to try something like this. This part of my driveway always had weeds growing in the gravel. And one day it just dawned on me, because I've been doing a lot of reading about permaculture and observing and interacting and that sort of stuff. Hey, stuff likes to grow there. Why don't I grow a weed that I like, which happens to be oregano and basil and things like that. Parsley and so on. So all I did was make holes in the gravel, and I planted different perennials in those holes, and then I covered the whole thing with sand because weeds really don't grow in sand. So about 3 inches of sand on top, and it has really worked out well. So I just want to show you the results here. This is about, I guess I built this in 2013, I think. And it's been doing great ever since. Maybe 2014. 2013 or 2014 is when I made this, and I haven't really done anything to it. I haven't watered it once this year. It's just taking care of itself just fine. I didn't even fertilize it this year in any way. Normally I put some compost tea over each plant once. I didn't even bother doing that this year. So let me show you this thing. This was a part of my driveway where I had a lot of weeds growing in the gravel against this south-facing wall side of my house. And one day it just dawned on me, because I'd been doing a lot of reading about permaculture and just that notion of watching and observing and thinking things over and letting the soil speak to you, sort of stuff. And it was just like it just dawned on me, like this soil is telling me to grow things here, that this is a good place to grow things. So what I did was I made some holes in the gravel, and I planted different perennial herbs. I've got some annuals growing here too, and they're not quite as impressive to look at. I'll talk about that more as we go along, but I planted perennials in the actual soil underneath, and then I put 3 or 4 inches of sand. I noticed that my children were young then. I noticed when you go to playgrounds, there's no weeds growing in the sandboxes, right? And it's partly because the kids are always tramping around, but even around the edges and the corners, there are really not too many weeds growing in the sandboxes. And it's because you're creating a kind of desert, right? Weed seed flies through the air and lands in sand. It's not going to germinate, it's just going to bake in the sun, because the sand doesn't hold moisture. So it's sort of an ideal mulch for a plant like a sage or an oregano, which doesn't really have a lot of requirements. I'm sure these would be even bigger and even more lush if they were in ideal soil conditions. But I mean, they're doing just fine, and I'm perfectly happy with the results I'm getting here. So really, there's no cost to growing them this way, and it's an absolutely maintenance-free garden, right? There's no weeding. I don't water this. I haven't done a thing here. Sometimes in early spring I'll mix up some compost tea and pour it over each plant, but I didn't even do that this year, and everything's coming great. So what do I got growing here? I got this is oregano, and I'll speak to the perennials first and then speak to the annuals. This is oregano. This is sage. This is a different variety of sage. This is tarragon, the one in the middle here. I just planted that this year. Seems to be doing quite well. I direct seeded this, so I didn't buy a transplant or anything. I just planted it. It's supposed to be, I think, zone 4 hardy perennial, so we'll see. This is more oregano. This is winter savory, so it's a perennial savory. And these two plants over here are Rosemary. I think they're both the same variety of rosemary. Rosemary is a perennial, but it's a zone 7A or 7B perennial. I grew rosemary, I can't remember where I grew rosemary in this garden last year. I was supposed to put a tent over it. I was supposed to erect some sort of, plastic structure over these to sort of make the climate a little gentler here. I think with a plastic dome over these, they'll overwinter just fine. But I didn't do that, so I had to buy new ones, and that's why they're not that big. But there'd be much to be gained by putting a little. I've got a natural wall here too, so I don't need much, right? I got insulation here and insulation there. So I was thinking of just putting a little plastic dome here. That way the roots can get a bit bigger and stronger every year, and the plant will grow that much more vigorously every spring. And since I'm right in this location, here's a neat thing. So last year at this spot I had parsley growing, and it went to seed, much like this one is right now. This one's going to seed, right? Parsley goes to seed every 2 years. It's biennial. So some of those seeds, look at that. I mean, just to give you a sense, this is not soil. This is that stuff that when construction companies use to build houses on and stuff like that. It's like clay and rocks and stuff like that. It's lousy soil, but because it's so hot here, I've got really nice parsley growing here. In fact, if you look even closer, you see this. I thought this was some sort of weed, and I picked it and I could smell. This is savory. So the savory over here, which does get flowers, you'll notice there's no wild savory growing in the sand. Like, those flowers go everywhere. They didn't germinate in the sand, but because they can get down between these rocks and get, the rain will push them down underneath the rocks where there's a bit of moisture, they actually germinated. So I mean, what a tough plant with almost zero requirements. I've got it growing all the way over here. Right? Just wild winter savory. If I don't pick that, it'll just keep growing. I might move it to another location. I don't really want stuff growing here, right? I sort of want it to look clean. But I decided to let it all go just because, hey, more the merrier sort of thing, especially this parsley. I'm just picking these as we need them for, cooking and stuff. I got 2 basil plants here. This is like a Thai basil. They're really not that impressive. I just don't think the soil here is rich enough for a basil. It's not rich soil. It's nice and warm, and it does. It looks dry, but if you go down, see how the sand's dark down there? That's moisture. And you get enough sand over top of actual soil, it keeps the soil from drying out. Strangely enough, right? Because it protects it from the sun. So it actually makes a pretty effective mulch, but there's no real nutrients in it, just some minerals. So yeah, I got these sort of like, quick to seed basil. Not ideal, far from ideal. So I think if I was to try basil again here, I'd have to dig a lot out and frig with it. I just don't think it's worth growing basil in this particular garden, even though it gets excellent sun. So next year I'll plant it in my cold frames, I think. This is an interesting variety of plant. It's called, I think, Vietnamese coriander. It's not coriander, but it tastes like coriander. Tastes good, and it just grows all summer long. And you just pick off sprigs as you need it, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And around the time your tomatoes come in, you have lots of it, so it's sort of ideal for making salsa. Anyway, so an herb garden is a weed garden, but they're weeds you like to eat. And it's the sort of thing you want to have close to your house so you can run down and grab fresh herbs whenever you cook. And this is a really easy, low maintenance way to do it. I haven't weeded this at all. It's taking care of itself just fine. You get your perennials, just stick them in there, and they just get, the root systems grow and mature, and the plants get bigger and bigger. And it's just a great way to go about putting in an herb garden. And also because it's all sand and stuff like that, it doesn't seem to be full of ants if you're worried about the ants, living close to your house and that sort of thing. It's worked out really great. So I hope that gave you some good ideas. And if it did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.